But sleep is so critical in kind of the way in which we kind of protect ourselves. And so I just want to talk about real quickly what's the cost if we don't get the sleep we need. And it turns out that there are lots of consequences of insufficient sleep. And so when I say insufficient sleep, this typically means for adults getting less than around 7 hours of sleep per night on average, right? So you can think about yourself and like how much sleep you get day to day. And in general, the recommendation is that you get at least 7 hours on average, right? So you can fluctuate a little bit. But we know that from kind of population level data that when people don't get that chronically, it seems to be at a cost for health. And so what are those things? Well, there's a strong link between insufficient amounts of sleep and the onset and progression of psychiatric illness. This is particularly true of depression. And there seems to be a really close link between depression and sleep. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest that if you treat sleep problems in people with depression, in some cases, their depression will improve, right? Not always, but there seems to be some evidence for a causal link there. There's a large amount of evidence linking insufficient sleep and cardiovascular risk. So this can be things like, hypertension, congestive heart failure, the development of atherosclerosis, and all cardiovascular related mortality has been linked to people who get less sleep than they should. The same is true for a host of other things, including obesity. Some of this is due to how it impacts our metabolism. Not getting enough sleep, but also, we're awake longer, right? If we're getting less sleep, we're awake longer, but also our preferences for things change. And so, anyone who's kind of had a really bad night of sleep, you can probably attest to the fact that what you want to eat is different, right? Like you might choose that extra slice of pizza or something like that instead of the salad, right? And it seems that when we don't get the sleep we need, our reward system has changed, kind of the preferences we have for things are changed, but also our ability, our willpower, if you will, is diminished, right? Like our cognitive control is not as intact. And so we tend to kind of consume more calories. And so over time, this can lead to a larger waistline. There's some data on sleep and infectious illness, which I'll touch on in a second. But also kind of a growing area of interest among sleep scientists is the link between insufficient amounts of sleep and risk for neurodegenerative diseases, right? So this is things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. And while it's not conclusive, there does seem to be a link between sleep and the risk for these things. And there's some evidence for a potential mechanism, specifically that, sleep seems to play an important role in like washing the brain of metabolites and things that build up throughout the day, and some of these proteins that have been associated with increased risk for Alzheimer's, particularly beta amyloid, which kind of builds up in the brain and can create premature cognitive decline. And then finally, insufficient sleep has been associated with premature mortality to all causes. So it seems like it's one of these things that, goes along with the other pillars of our health, right? Nutrition, exercise, but also now sleep, that seems to be in critical importance for our health. So just to touch briefly, because I want to get to kind of what do we do about this, is the link between sleep and susceptibility to infectious illness, because I think it actually is one of the strongest pieces of evidence for sleep and its impact on health. And of course is timely given that we've just gone through this pandemic. So in this study, we recruited healthy people and we measured their sleep using kind of a souped up research grade device that kind of measures it rather than relying on someone's self-report. But then we brought them into the laboratory and we exposed everyone to live rhinovirus, right? So we shot rhinovirus up in their nose, and then we saw who got sick. So we kept them in a hotel and quarantined them so we could track them over time. And then we tried to identify their symptoms and see who actually developed what we called a biologically verified cold. And so how did we do this? We just didn't take everybody's word for it and their symptoms. We actually measured these things. So it was incredibly rigorous. And so what we did first was ensure that, we gave everyone the virus, who actually gets infected. And it turns out not everyone gets infected. And so we, used a saline solution and cultured up the cells, the nasal cells daily to look for replication of the virus that we had exposed everyone to, and that was our evidence of infection. Or we also looked at antibody titers 28 days later, which was also evidence of infection. But then we wanted to know about symptoms, because not everyone who's infected actually gets sick. And so to do this, we had our research coordinators collect the tissues that people used across the time and had them weigh them every day and subtract the weight of the bag and the tissue. And that gave us an objective measure of mucus production that people had. And then we also looked at basic nasal congestion. And so every day we would, put this dye into someone's nose and then time how long it took to get to the back of their throat. And the longer it took, the more congested they were. And so if someone was infected and they met a criteria on mucus production and or what's called mucociliary clearance time, they were deemed to have a cold. And so what do we find? Well, we find this graded linear relationship that people who got less sleep were much more likely to get a cold. Again, everyone got the virus, right? But it's something to do with how it affects our immune systems, our ability to clear that virus and not develop into this more serious cold. And specifically, people who slept 6 or fewer hours were about 4 times more likely to get sick compared to people who slept more than 7 hours. Okay, so we have these links between sleep and our health. We all know the experience. I mean, when people get the sleep they need, all the data will suggest that they're kind of better versions of themselves, right? They're better partners, they're better parents, they're more empathetic, they're more productive, their immune system is stronger, we're better able to kind of cope with stressors. And so all of those things kind of are daytime type things, right? That are critical for living our best lives. But oftentimes people will spend most of their time thinking about how do I improve my sleep, but they'll focus really closely on the hour before bed, right? Kind of like making sure that their room is perfect and all of these things to ensure a good night rest. And those are all important. I'm not to say that they're not, but actually, what we can do to improve our sleep doesn't start when we get in bed. It actually starts the moment we wake up. And so I want to kind of walk through kind of all of the different parts of the day where we can have these opportunities to have a better night's sleep. And the reason why I say this is because, a lot of us suffer from insomnia. A lot of us have bad nights of sleep. In fact, if you're watching this with 2 other people, one of you has kind of significant insomnia that you would tell a doctor about, right? So it's like 30% of the population reports this. And so, it's definitely something that can be addressed. And I think there are some kind of key factors that can be moved around where it will, increase the likelihood that someone will have a better night's sleep. Okay.